Kuala Lumpur runs on coffee. It's in the DNA of the city. From the thick, sweet kopi in a kopitiam to the lifestyle statement of a Starbucks cup, to the almost scientific ritual of a single origin pour-over in TTDI. We have the culture, we have the customers, we have the craft. We have everything a world-class coffee city needs, except for one thing: the coffee. In 2023, the entire country of Malaysia produced just over 6,800 tons of coffee beans. To put that in perspective, Vietnam produces over 1.8 million tons. It's a drop in the ocean. This entire vibrant ecosystem is built on beans imported from elsewhere, and that raises a profound nagging question. Why isn't Malaysia a coffee nation? You're watching Explaining Malaysia, a video essay project to explore the soul of Malaysia. I'm your host, Mr. Kuala Lumpur. To understand the paradox, you first have to understand the story we all know. Coffee experts talk about the modern history of coffee in 3 waves. The first wave was about making coffee accessible to everyone. In Malaysia, this is the soul of the kopitiam. It's Robusta beans roasted with margarine and sugar, brewed strong and sweetened with condensed milk. It's not about tasting notes, because the flavor is in masking the bitterness of the coffee. This is pure fuel. The second wave was about making coffee a branded experience. Think of the arrival of Starbucks and Coffee Bean in the 1990s. Suddenly, coffee was a lifestyle accessory. It was about consistency, comfort, free Wi-Fi, and a cup with your name on it. But again, it's all about brand, not bean. The third wave, which hit KL around the late 2000s, was the next evolution to all that. With the boom of espresso bars inspired by Melbourne and chains like Artisan Coffee, this drink was finally craft. It's about single origin Arabica, lighter roasts, and complex flavors. It's about the science of pressure and pour, not to mention the story of each bean. So back to the original question. Why isn't Malaysia one of the world's biggest coffee producers?
The answer lies in an almost forgotten story of a spectacular boom, a catastrophic collapse, and a forgotten history that lies buried under our feet. It's the story of how, for a fleeting moment at least, Kuala Lumpur was poised to be a capital built on coffee, and what happened to kill that dream.
The recorded history of coffee cultivation in Malaya actually begins much earlier than people would think, with the first colonial experiments taking place probably in the late 18th century. These were small, scattered efforts. I've seen academic and governmental references to coffee being first cultivated in 1779 in the Malay Peninsula, but none of that makes sense to me. Arabica requires 15 to 22 degrees Celsius climates, and 1779 would actually predate the British colonial presence in Penang, which would have been the earliest registered mention I can find. We know that by 1805, a whole 70 years before Selangor, coffee planting was attempted in Penang through Stamford Raffles. Yes, the famous Singapore Stamford Raffles at Mount Erskine on the island near his bungalow. But a century later, a crisis on the other side of the world would turn this quiet experiment into a full-blown industrial gamble. The thing is, there was a great, almost history to Malaysia's coffee industry, and it could have been a world beater. Let's time travel back to the 1880s. The catalyst was a catastrophe elsewhere. A fungal plague called coffee leaf rust had wiped out the premier Arabica plantations of Ceylon. British planters, ruined but experienced, were looking for new, rust-free lands. Malaya was the new frontier.
Led by pioneers like Thomas Heslop Hill, they carved massive estates out of the jungle around Kuala Lumpur. Wells Hill, what we now call Bukit Nanas, right in the heart of the city, was a showcase coffee plantation. The Batu Caves estate was a sprawling 2,800-acre bed on the bean. This was our first great plantation drop.
But they couldn't plant the world's favorite bean, Arabica. It's a delicate plant that needs high altitudes. Malaya's hot, humid lowlands were fatal to it, so they made a profound gamble. They planted Coffea liberica, a hardier, larger, and more obscure species native to West Africa. This was the Liberica Gamble, basing an entire industry on a bean that made up less than 2% of the global market. And for a while, the gamble paid off. A crisis in Brazil disrupted the global supply, prices skyrocketed, and Malayan Liberica became exceptionally profitable. Coffee was king. Kuala Lumpur, which had been a rough tin mining town, was transforming into a sophisticated hub for a booming plantation economy.
The future was here, and it smelled like coffee.
The golden age lasted barely a decade. Then came the perfect storm. First, Brazil got its act together. A flood of cheap Brazilian coffee inundated the world market and prices crashed. The high profits that sustained the Malayan boom vanished overnight. Then the inevitable happened. The rust fungus that had destroyed Ceylon finally arrived in Malaya in the 1890s. The warm, humid climate that made Liberica possible also made it the perfect breeding ground for the fungus. The Liberica Gamble had failed. The industry was hit by a dual shock: financial ruin and ecological catastrophe. Just as the coffee dream was dying, a new opportunity emerged: an explosive global demand for natural rubber, fueled by the dawn of the automobile age. And the rubber tree was perfectly suited to the same land. The transition was swift and brutal. Planters, desperate to restore their fortunes, abandoned their diseased coffee trees and replanted with the new green gold. The coffee boom was over. In retrospect, it was the dress rehearsal for the rubber boom that would define Malaya for the next half-century.
But imagine for a moment if it had survived. What if the rust never came, or we had adopted a hardier bean? Our national identity, so tied to rubber and palm oil, might have been forged by coffee. We could have been a coffee Malaya, known globally like Colombia or Ethiopia. Our kopitiam culture might have evolved into the vanguard of a global third wave, celebrating single-origin Malayan Liberica. Coffee plantations in Selangor could have been as iconic as the tea estates of Cameron Highlands are today.
It was more than a crop. It was a different path, a completely different future. A future that was seamlessly paved over by rubber. But even this colonial boom and bust isn't the true beginning. The story of empire measured in exports often overwrites a quieter one. Coffee's entry into the Malay world likely didn't come from a Dutch ship in 1616. It came in pilgrims' cups.
By the 15th century, Sufi mystics in Yemen were drinking kahwa to fuel nights of devotion. This habit spread all across the Muslim world. Pilgrims from Johor, Patani, or Aceh returning from Mecca were the likeliest first tasters of coffee. The first sips in this part of the world, perhaps in the 1550s, weren't about profit, but presence. It was communion, not commodity. When the Dutch finally planted coffee in Java, it wasn't the beginning. It was an acceleration of a conversation that had already started in the shadows. Today, that forgotten history is stirring. A new chapter is being written, not in the older states around KL, but in the new heartlands. The fight is being led by Johor, which now produces nearly half of all of Malaysia's coffee, most of it from the district of Pontian. States like Terengganu and Sabah are also emerging as serious players.
But the ghost of the Liberica Gamble remains. The vast majority of what we grow today isn't the delicate high-altitude Arabica, prized by connoisseurs. It's the hardy, resilient Liberica and Robusta, the very beans suited to our lowlands.
So the question isn't just if we can grow coffee, but what kind of coffee identity we want. Kuala Lumpur reminds us that coffee doesn't live in just one wave. Here, the first, second, and third all crashed into each other, often on the same stick. And beneath them all, the ghost of a fourth, a lost industry, a different history.
Maybe KL will never be the global coffee capital it might have been. But in its own chaotic, beautiful way, it already is one. You just have to know where to look for the story. If you enjoy this video and want to support Explaining Malaysia, please subscribe. And consider joining my Substack for updates and stories. You can also donate to our Ko-fi tip jar. A latte or two helps fuel this research for one of Malaysia's only history content creators. Link in the description.